We have a few items on our agenda this evening, and to remind you, we're looking at the timing we're looking at is closing in order to attend a reception that'll be happening about 5:30. Not about 5:30, at 5:30. So let's get right into our agenda items. The first item on our agenda is a follow-up concerning the the ordinance concerning the Salt Lake City Housing Plan. And we're joined by Nick and Ben and Sean and Melissa. So this is an opportunity for final. So I'm saying truly final questions, comments, observations, praise, whatever you want to provide. So do you have anything for us, Nick?
We'd especially like to focus on the praise tonight. That might be a good option. Real quick outline, I guess, of what we just want to update the council on, what has been done since the last briefing. The council approved the guiding principles, the 20 guiding principles, and we've talked with hand staff, and the way that we're proposing for those to be included in the housing plan is to insert as chapter 2, and that would just bump the rest of the sections down. In addition to that, the guiding principles will be referenced as a whereas clause in the adopting ordinance, and so if that's all right with the council, that's what we're planning with that.
And so to remind council members, this is on our agenda this evening for adoption, should you feel ready, which
Yes.
I hope you do.
Yes.
So questions at this. Melissa, did you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to say there was, and Nick may be getting to this, there was also a clarification because we wanted to make sure that the guiding principles were used as a lens for implementation while the housing policy that was already adopted was used for creation. So there is also a distinction that's made, and I think it would be chapter 4 now that says, and these principles were here for the creation of the document so that there's a clear alignment of how they work together.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments? Something, sorry? On anything, on anything related to getting this adopted this evening.
So if I may, we do have one more clarification we would like to get on accessory dwelling units. So since the council asked planning to take it back and work on it some more, we went through the language, and it may be appropriate for the council as it currently exists, but we said we proposed some potential options to consider for changes that just make it a little more flexible going forward, since the council has not made a final determination on ADUs and where they will be located throughout the city. So this
So it's the highlighted that you've got there, Ben, that you're suggesting that the addition of the underlined and the elimination of the cross through.
Yeah.
Has anybody reviewed that? Yes, Aaron.
I think that eliminating those is where we are right now, even though we'd probably disagree on the first 2 bullet points, but probably not the 3rd bullet point. So I'm in support of eliminating that language. And for the second point under there, I do want to keep the language about the city providing building plans to increase the financial accessibility of ADU implementation across the city. I know, James.
I know, Aaron. You already know where I stand on that. It's not our business to be doing that.
So you're looking at number 2. You're okay, but the recommendation right now is, are you comfortable with the addition of the underline that Ben has highlighted there and the elimination of those bullet points? We have straw polled those, and they've gone back to the planning department as part of their consideration, but it would provide a little more flexibility to take them out of this plan as that simultaneous process is happening. Are you comfortable with that? Any objections to that? Looks like we're good.
Okay.
I have a question. Just to be clear, can you scroll back up? Because so we're comfortable saying in the highlighted portion to create design and approvals. Okay, never mind. I got it.
Got it. Okay.
I just needed to process out loud.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Okay, we're good there.
So then number 2 is, does the council want to support the design and creation of plans?
And we're good with that.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Anything else, Nick?
I think James was the only one who voted against
I
that
don't
one in
even
our
know if
straw
we've
poll.
actually really had
Oh,
a formal straw poll about this.
Yeah, we went back and listened to the tape. There was no formal straw poll taken.
Yeah,
Let's do
that's,
it.
let's make
So that's
sure
why we
it's
just wanted to
formal.
bring it back.
So the question, council members, is the suggestion that was part of the discussion in the ADU process was the idea of providing city pre-approved building plans and financial options for ADUs. Do we want to include that in our plan? Do we want to eliminate that in our plan? So let's have any questions or comments to start that conversation. Yes, Andrew.
Chair, would this be a plan that would meet all if it's a conditional use requirements, therefore it'd be immediately able to build, essentially? Is that the concept of these plans, or are these just model plans that could be tailored to an individual site but still have to go through a complete process, a review?
Yes, that's my understanding. These would be plans that the community could use to model after, but they still would have to go through the conditional use process, if that is the process the council adopts in the future.
Well, yeah, and I guess I wouldn't want to be premature to say that what we will have is a conditional use process. That's one of the options that may come back to you, but it's not necessarily going to be the recommendation. It might be. So I think in the spirit of the first modification, we're just wanting to make sure there's enough flexibility in the plan that you don't box yourself into something that may or may not work citywide. So
That was my question about these plans. If they're concepts or ideas that could, essentially it's a way for a developer or somebody to have an easy access to a pre-made plan that you could just build, essentially, as long as you met the certain conditions. Is that the idea?
Yeah, the intent really around it was we were trying to mitigate some of the concerns around poorly designed ADUs. And so we wanted to kind of provide a framework that was solid, that could be sort of changed superficially to match the neighborhood and the house and et cetera, but foundationally would produce a good product, and so that people had that option without the additional expenses Councilmember Mendenhall was speaking to.
My personal opinion, I understand where you're coming from, James, about our proper role. I do think in pilot projects where this is a new concept about infill development that is very sensitive around it, I like the idea of proposing concepts and ideas that would be sound. It also helps with some of the cost issues. So folks who have approached me about this really want to do it, but there's a cost issue as well. This may mitigate some of the costs up front and design of these things. So I would be in favor of the concept of it. The details we have to work out.
Derek and then Charlie.
I agree with Councilmember Johnston and Mendenhall as well. I think that it is important for us to figure out a way to support ADUs through financing and potentially building plans or anything else that may make it easier for a homeowner to take advantage of this new ordinance. The language is a little bit concerning to me in that it feels like it ties the ordinance directly to us having these. And so I would prefer to have it suggest that this might be an option for the city rather than have the ordinance hinge on us providing these. Because I think that we could go about it in a number of different ways. I've mentioned this before, but I think the RDA could play a role in this. And so I just want to be careful with that language, although I do support having this in there.
I do want to clarify. I wouldn't support adding financial options at this point to help with construction of one. I support the providing approved or ideas of plans that would help with the design cost, not necessarily subsidizing the build of it.
Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the same thoughts that Andrew just mentioned. So when we talk about providing financing options, what exactly are we talking about?
We would primarily, so initially we were having these conversations as a joint conversation with the RDA, and so we weren't sure how it played out. And one way that we could do it, and I think it could lie both in the RDA and HAND, is we do have a mortgage program now and also a rehabilitation program, and so we have mechanisms that it would run through in that process.
Okay, thank you for that. Frankly, I would be more comfortable if we just stuck with the city providing approved building plans and we strike the financing options at this point.
Let me try something else. And again, council members, I'm just truly looking at maximum flexibility. Would it be appropriate to keep the concept in there with a recommendation that as the ordinance rolls out, the city make recommendations for approved plans, a process, a financing mechanism, rather than right now, the way that's worded, the ordinance rollout is hinged on all three of those components. And rather than saying that's a requirement of rolling out the ordinance, that perhaps they could come back with the staff could come back to the council with recommendations on how to do a plan or guiding principles to a plan or something that makes sense based on how your ordinance rolls out, if it's citywide, some finances for financing options and an internal process for managing ADU applications. Would it be okay to say that that needs to be addressed when the ordinance comes back?
Mr. Chair, I think that's gets closer to where we need to be. I still have some concerns about adding the words financing options, because I think it has the potential of creating more confusion with folks, thinking that the city has grants available or that we are going to be providing financing for something like this. I think as long as we are going the route that you're talking about, where we leave it somewhat vague and give staff flexibility to come up with this stuff, I would be much more comfortable with that. I do think that having building plans available is a good idea, especially on something where it is untested like this really is.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I just would like to say that I wholeheartedly agree with Charlie on this. I want to be really careful with how we get into the language here. I'm afraid that with your suggestion, we're getting too far into the weeds, which is really what tripped up the ADU ordinance, I think, in the past. So I want to take a step back and really empower staff to come back to us later on. I think it would be totally appropriate for us to indicate that we would be receptive to proposals from staff around, financing or design plans or whatever it may be. But I don't want it to be so intimately tied to the ordinance itself.
James.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this more difficult than it already has been. And I guess we're thinking of two different things. When I think about city-approved building plans, I'm thinking of actual plans saying, here, ready to submit drawings, this is for my property. When for me, if all we're doing is setting standards, saying this is the setback, this is the step back, these are possibilities, but for us to say, here are your plans ready to go for your ADU, that's absolutely ridiculous. Unless we're actually just saying, here are the standards, this is what we would like to see, this is best practice, and we help them walk through that scenario, because, I mean, let's be honest. Where are these going to be built? These are going to be built with people that actually have the money to do it. I mean, it's plain and simple. And who are they going to rent to? They're going to be renting to family and friends. They're going to be very specific. This isn't an absentee landlord. This is somebody that is owner-occupied. This individual is going to be very specific on whom he's going to rent to. So for me to say the city's going to supply plans, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yes, Aaron.
I hear you, James, and I get where your background is and where you're coming from, but I disagree. I think that the plans that my intention is that we would look at creating plans that someone could pick up, submit as their design, and get a permit to build. And the equity that the senior population, which is my specific hope for ADUs, is that we create greater access to aging in place by enabling people who have equity in their home but are on a fixed income to take advantage of the equity in their home in order to build these ADUs, that this cuts down on those costs for the capital investment to do that by having plans already created. So that's my reason for supporting this. And I would be fine cutting out the financing options, as Charlie was talking about, and others, And I wanted to throw out here that in the coming general budget, I think that it may become relevant for us to contemplate adding an innovative housing ombudsman position. Because as we've talked with planning department and with HAND, and we talk about tiny houses and how, and our ideas around expanding that kind of opportunity in the city, it might not just be that we have a clear internal process, but that we have someone who is specifically equipped to assist in this kind of development, and ADUs would fit into that. So I'm fine cutting out the financing options. I don't know if we want to allude to the potential for
Let me make a suggestion here. What if we deleted the financing of these units may be the biggest barrier, however, and then just put it is in, and I don't even know that we need the intent part of it, that the city will explore and make recommendations on potential plans. And I want to make sure that clear internal process is first, actually, because I think that's a given, that we have a clear internal process for processing ADUs, and that there may be recommendations on plans that may be available for ADU
so recommendation
construction.
on clear internal processes and potential building plans?
Yeah, there you go. Does that work?
You get that, Ben? Recommendation on clear internal processes.
And I'm sorry to do this writing by committee on a screen, but I think we're pretty close to being there. Does that work? And so is everyone okay if we eliminate the potential financial options as part of the plan?
Mm-hmm.
They still may come back to you as a recommendation through HAND, but does that work? Okay, so are you okay with that language right there that's highlighted by Ben? Okay, good. Anything else, Nick?
So the motion will be long tonight, and you'll have to read all of this to make sure we get it in, but we will write it up and have it ready for you.
Nick, you're the best. All of you are great. Thank you very much for your work on this, and thank you for incorporating our ideas and concerns. Good job, council members. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is a resolution concerning West Capitol Street closure deadline extension. Brian Fulmer from our staff has this, and Joel Patterson. Welcome, Brian and Joel. And Brian, could you just tell us a little bit about what this is? We've seen this before, so.
Yes, you've seen this twice before. You'll recall in August of this year, the council adopted a resolution extending the deadline of this ordinance, which was passed in 2015. It expired in August of 2016. You extended it by 4 months to give the developer an opportunity to meet with the community council and present their plan just for some more public input. At this point, they have done that. The community council expressed their thoughts on it, which really are not related to the street closure portion of it. It's related to the associated but separate subdivision plan. And the council's role in this is to decide whether to extend the ordinance for the requested 2-year period or some other period. And that's
Thanks,
the intro.
Brian. And Joel, do you have anything to add?
Just that the Capitol Hill Community Council considered this. They decided to consider it at their board member meeting, and then share some of their comments with the community council, but then forward the letter that you saw in your packet.
Perfect, thank you. And council members, this is in District 3. My intent with a 4-month deadline that we put on it was to incentivize the developer to act quickly. I am completely comfortable with this request for an extension now. They did what I'd hoped for, which was to go back to the neighborhood. So any questions for Brian or Joel? This will be on the agenda for approval this evening. And I think we're approving as is. So Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Joel. We are on to item number 3, which is the Twilight Concerts update. The Economic Development Department was committed to getting back to us by the end of the year, and we were able to find a little time for them to do that, to tell us a little bit about what they've been working on concerning the concert series formerly known as Twilight. I don't quite know what to call it now, so the Twilight Zone concert series. So I'll let you guys tell us what's going on. Welcome, Ben, and welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Chairman Penfold. As you may remember, about 2 months ago, we presented to you 4 options. You asked us a number of fantastic questions. We have transmitted back to you a number of different responses to those questions, which you should have in your packets. So really what we're looking for tonight is some direction and have a policy conversation with you. How would you like us to move forward?
Do you want to just, why don't you just sort of quickly for public, run through those quick recommendations, and then we'll open it up for questions. Does that work?
Sounds perfect.
Okay.
So there were 4 models that we presented. The first model we referred to as the current model. And the current model focuses on 7 highly curated shows with a crowd size flexibility. It would require a city sponsorship of about $337,000 to keep Twilight as you see it today, which means that there would be those 7 shows, and the cost per attendee, which I think is really important, is about $6.88. So that's current model. Model number 2 is a 4-show model. So this is focusing on the reduction of shows, increasing the artist fees, which will draw a larger crowd, which means that we can then push the city sponsorship to where we stand today, which is around $171,000. But then, most importantly, it does drop the cost per attendee to around $1.94. So less concerts, but a little bit more on artist fees, drawing more attendance. Model number 3 is the Gallivan model. This was one that the council had asked us to investigate. We believe a city sponsorship for a Gallivan model, which focuses on reduction in venue size and an overall lower expense and risk. It's around $161,000. We also believe that the city's per attendee cost would be $3.29. So higher cost to the city to put on an event at Gallivan than it would be per person than it would be to do a smaller concert series. And then last but not least is model number 4, which is Twilight Around the City. And really the focus here was to contemplate activation of spaces and venues around the city. We're very fortunate that we have a lot of great venues, and so thought was, could we bring concert series out to those venues? City sponsorship remains around the same as the current model, about $170,000, but the cost per attendee does increase significantly to about $4.86 per person.
Questions, comments, thoughts, observations? Yes, Andrew, and then I think Derek has
A question on the high-risk, high-reward scenario. Is there factored in a wear and tear issue with Pioneer Park, with 22,000 people estimated per show?
Well, those fees are currently calculated by the Arts Council in their budget.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, this year had less attendance, and I think that number came down from the expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's budgeted in.
So the wear and tear on the park itself, because 22,000 people could have a very different effect than 8,000 some of these shows.
Right, yeah.
I understand that doing half as many means more downtime between them theoretically, or if you don't do that, if you do a full month of this, but is that factored in this way?
Yes, and there are other, higher costs that are calculated in as well. For example, the police force's security necessary, and the ticketing also, those expenses go up as well, and that's all calculated into that model.
So I know there's a higher risk, and you have it built in about 10% addition for a risk kind of buffer. Does that cover one rained out show? Two, what's sort of the breaking point for this model?
I'm sorry?
What's the breaking point for this model to lose money? Losing one show in the year, or do you have any leeway at all?
The goal is to never lose money.
Sure.
So one of the things that we have contemplated, and we tried to implement this year, is insurance, rain insurance. So if there is a rained out date, there is insurance to cover that. The good news is we didn't have a rained out date this year, so we never had to trigger that tool. But that would be something we'd absolutely investigate in a high risk, high reward model.
Okay, thank you.
And to that point, anytime you have a high percentage of earned revenue, your risk goes up. And what's critical if we're exploring this model is the risk mitigation in terms of rain insurance. We would have to give a more heavy emphasis in that area
And
in general.
One more question, Mr. Chair. Is it realistic, the fee we're associating with that high risk, high reward to get the level of performer we're talking about for the foreseeable future, or next year, and then we're going to lose that again because it keeps escalating?
We have done the analysis on that, and and we can share that. On the artist fees, for example, I think we had a $200,000 budget associated with that, which if carried out from the current, we statistically analyzed it, and that should bring in a crowd of about 35,000 on average, but that is an average of the last 5 years, and artist fees have gone up since then. So in reality, you would get a little bit of a lower return every year for that. And what we're saying is we're targeting the 20,000, or the 20,000 mark for each show.
Would you anticipate spreading it out every other week, or do you have any sense of the frequency of this model?
We haven't set a schedule for it yet, and I think it's going to involve some flexibility. You want to get the high attendance drawers under this model. So you may have a model that's a little more flexible on exactly when the dates are based off of the artist's availability.
Yeah. Okay.
Derek.
So, oh man, Twilight. I guess an observation for this body. I think that the 4 options are all fine, and I really don't have an emotional attachment to either one of them. Obviously, the price point, the point at which we buy in for all of them vary, and so I think that's more of a budgetary consideration for us. But, I almost worry that we might be wading into the administrative role a little bit too much by trying to figure out what the programming should look like. I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm more interested in just figuring out, what the price point is and whether or not we're willing to pay for it, and then moving forward. I think my secondary concern is that I don't necessarily want to skip Twilight in 2018. I don't think that would be doing the brand itself any favors. And, based on quite a bit of feedback that I've received from the community, they don't really want to see us skip a year either. So I don't really know which direction to push this conversation.
Mr. Chair,
but
I guess mine's a follow-up to that too. That was my main concern, is that I think as we look at these that are being transmitted to us, that was my main question. We see the board, what they've recommended, but I would like to know what the administration recommends. Specifically, I need to know where they stand on it. I understand where the board is coming from, but from the administration, I have no idea where they're coming from.
So 2 things, Laura and Ben and Sylvia, welcome. You snuck up on me from our staff. Sort of, if you could respond to that concept of this year and the situation related to that, and then has the staff made does the staff have a preference to, as you're looking through these options, as to what might make sense going forward?
And when I started the conversation, I started around a policy conversation, because for me, it really is a policy decision. The arts are important to our community, and the question for me is, how much of the investment do we want to make, and what's the priority for the council? Is the priority having a number of different concerts with a variety of different artists that expose individuals to artists that they may never have heard of before? Is it to break even? That's a policy conversation. Or is it to activate spaces around the city? So from my perspective, it really is a policy conversation. Ben and I love all of them. We think that they all have merit, but it really is a policy around the arts. And is it to break even? Is it to activate spaces? Is it to expose people to various art forms? And that's a very different conversation.
So Laura, from an economic development perspective, do we expect arts of all kind to break even? Like if we do a mural or a sculpture or whatever it may be, I mean, I don't think that it's realistic for us to imagine any art to break even. And so I don't mean to speak for everybody here, but that never really was a concern of mine so much as we just didn't know what we were getting for our investment in the past. And so, you know, now we're taking a harder look at this. We're measuring things in a way that I think we haven't in the past. There's some more clarity around the Arts Council and their nonprofit arm as well. So I think those have been resolved. And so for me, it's a matter of it. I guess the break even is not really a consideration for me necessarily, personally speaking.
Aaron and then Lisa.
And I think that the idea of us setting a new and perhaps distinctive policy that Twilight would then execute on is a conversation that would happen before today's conversation, where then we're looking at actual options for implementation. Because it sounds like the policy that we currently have isn't necessarily reflected in the options, and if so, I guess my question is, are you saying that we should revisit our arts policy, or are you saying that one of these options better fulfills the existing policy than the other options, and if so, which one?
I think we're not asking you to revisit a full arts policy. What we are asking you to do is give us a policy on Twilight.
By picking an implementation strategy, not by making a policy.
Through the implementation strategy, though, I think we are getting to a policy directive. Because if we look at the different models, each one has a different perspective and a different flavor. And I think that helps to guide. Again, if the priority is exposing people to a number of different art forms, then there's a higher investment that goes with that. That's a policy direction with a budget implementation behind it.
Well, some of us had the opportunity to meet with some staff of yours and some arts organizations in the city, and it was a really wonderful discussion that where ultimately I think a lot of us recognize the opportunity that Twilight is to recruit more patrons of the arts to different art organizations and experiences in the city, that what it currently does is bring people in to hear a concert who might not be coming downtown to go to a gallery opening or to see some performance art. And that I think for me, and what I think the policy actually is currently getting at, is to engage people in the arts in a really approachable and affordable way that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. And so I tend toward this fourth option for a number of reasons, but I would like it to more greatly engage the existing arts organizations in the city in the form of opening acts or intermission acts, or whether that's performance art or there's art displayed at the different venues, but that we are really connecting in a visible way those patrons with other opportunities and things that might pique their interest that perhaps have nothing to do with the performance of Twilight that night.
So Aaron, that sounds like a bit of a sort of a policy direction there, that it's engaging, it has some local component, that it perhaps provides an opportunity that wouldn't exist otherwise. I mean, those are components of policy. And the model that most closely sort of fits that at this point is 4, but modifications could be made to that as well, based on refinement of a discussion like that. I'm trying to summarize what you're saying. You need to correct me at all?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Is that helpful?
Yeah,
at
go
all?
ahead.
Oh, if I can rewind a little bit too, I think, so about a year ago, we were asked to bring back models to the council to explore different avenues of what Twilight could look like. And so, that was the start for what we presented to council and how we got to where we are right now. If at the end of the day, this is a feedback session for us to say we trust the administration on the implementation of this and send us something in the budget request, we're also comfortable with that. So.
I have one
Yes,
more piece
so
of that.
a follow-up, Aaron.
Thank you. We talked about Twilight as a gateway art form for connecting patrons with other opportunities to engage in the arts throughout the city. And I think it was brought up that this could also be an opportunity to connect sponsors of Twilight with other arts opportunities. I think that as the organization that Twilight basically has become is engaging different community partners than may otherwise be engaged with the arts, and that I think there's an opportunity to improve the financial health of arts in the city by intentionally helping foster cultivation of outside entities participating in other arts organizations, if that makes sense. I don't mean to go any deeper in that one, but the idea also came up that perhaps Twilight needs its own advisory board, and that advisory board could specifically have an economic slant to it, that it could have some business development type positions on it in addition to arts centered people or backgrounds of individuals. And that might be something we talk about at a future discussion, but I thought it was worth bringing up here. The takeaway that I keep thinking of that dialogue we had with the community partners was Twilight has grown from a baby to this behemoth living in the parents' basement, and it's really, really big. And this is what the arts festival, some said, was like. It was within the city arts organization, and it broke off as its own 501c3, and our arts festival functions independently now. And so people were contemplating whether or not Twilight's at that point of budding off on its own, but I don't think we're here to talk about that today.
Thank you, Aaron. Lisa?
Mr. Chair, it would seem to me that today we have one thing to decide, and that is whether or not we want Twilight in 2018 or not. If we say yes, then we have a second thing to determine what that should look like. If we say no, that gives more time to have these policy discussions and move in the direction we want to. I would be in favor of not doing Twilight next year. I think it's a strong enough brand that it can certainly manage to survive a 1-year layoff. The Olympics are every 4 years if you're a downhill racer. So I think people don't forget about the Olympics. They just tune in once every 4 years. I think 1 year won't really hurt, but I think we need to make that basic decision first. Do we want to do that? And depending on that discussion, then determine if one of these models is a preferred model.
So if you could hold that thought for a minute, I wanted to go to Andrew for another comment or question, and then maybe circle around.
I think 2018 is off the table, though, in our current model. The time frame doesn't work, so I don't know that question is a question. But as far as a policy statement, I go along the lines of what Aaron's talking about. I support option 1 personally. I think Twilight might be an avenue to other arts, but Twilight is a signature event downtown that draws numbers. It draws millennials downtown for big events. And the survey talks about that. It's what they're looking for. They want to have it bigger, right? It's not for everybody. It's clearly not for folks who haven't gone in 3 years who are looking for something else in Galvin. And maybe it has gotten bigger and bigger than the original thing, but if I'm looking at a policy statement of this draws people downtown for economic vibrancy and our cultural core, and 2, is it economically sustainable for our budget discussion here? And for me, that makes it a policy decision for us. I see it as a big event that is going to be economically sustainable, and those are the 2 reasons I like number 1.
Thank you. I think we need to address this question about fiscal year, calendar year 2018. It's the proposal as you've been moving forward assumes a break, correct? So there's not a line item in the budget or in a budget amendment, or at this point there's no money assumed for Twilight happening this season.
Correct.
Is it even a possibility?
I can take that one. It's our intent with the feedback that we get here today to put it in the next budget cycle for the 2019 Twilight. With that said, we've been having discussions with the private sector about potentially doing a 2018 Twilight, but we're hesitant to promise anything until we have we have something on paper that's, solid.
So something you're exploring, but at this point, the assumption is that the Salt Lake City Arts Council will not be producing Twilight for the 2018 season. So the question that's come up from several council members is, could we or should we? And I guess what I'm asking is that even a possibility?
It's our recommendation that we not do it. I think it's always a possibility, but you take on certain risks with it, right? If you have a shorter time frame to book artists, you're going to get maybe an artist that won't draw the same crowd as someone else, right? So you get impacts like that all throughout. You're stacking staff time to plan this, and they'll have a new coordinator position in place who has never done Twilight before to do all this planning. So your risks go substantially up in terms of earned revenue.
And you mentioned that there may be another opportunity. Any sense of when you might be able to provide additional information on that?
I would guess in the next couple of weeks.
So by the first of the year?
Yeah.
Hate to kick this to a discussion for next year, but that might be part of what we're looking at here. And the reality is we don't have an opportunity today to provide funding, but there's a budget amendment opening coming in January, so that would be an opportunity to provide that.
And as well, the discussions that we're having right now with the private sector don't involve additional funding from the council.
So let's suggest this. If you expect to have additional information in the next couple of weeks, can we look at a tentative schedule to revisit this in January? Would suggest not the first meeting, but maybe the second or third meeting as a briefing. You've gotten some feedback today that about possible policy direction for this. Could you come back to us with a recommendation on how you might want to move forward, including any potential programming for this next season coming up?
Mr. Chair.
Does that work? Yes, Derek.
I'd like to ask Laura and Ben, what other policy questions are unanswered for you to come back to us with something more concrete?
I think if what you're saying is that, we've provided these options in the understanding that with certain models, it will inherently have a higher cost. So if we keep going with the current model, we're going to be asking of the council $300,000 moving forward to support Twilight. And if we go with a model that's, for example, a fewer number of shows and but is less money being requested from council, then what we're asking is if we wanted to open up the conversation for input, but if from the council's perspective, would you just like to see this in a budget cycle request, and that's how the recommendation from the administration comes, or in this follow-on briefing?
Mr. Chair, I would recommend maybe a couple straw polls on policy considerations around Twilight. And I don't know if anybody has ideas here, but maybe it would, I don't want to have another conversation with economic development where we're just kind of tossing it back and forth like this. It doesn't feel very productive. I'm not willing to get into the business of choosing one or the other. We should definitely choose, structure the policy and then have them come to us with a proposal, because it's uncomfortable for me to try and get into choosing. It doesn't feel right for our legislative role.
Do you have a recommendation for a straw poll?
Well, I think there's a couple questions around cost for sure, about accessibility, and the ticket price. I think size and who we're looking to attract is another piece that we should probably straw poll. Anything else I'm open to, but I'm just trying to get some clarity for these folks so that they can come back to us with something better.
I don't disagree with that. One of the considerations I also would like to put on the table is you have two new council members coming on board here in a couple of weeks, and it's probably valuable to have them participate in this conversation. So this is what I'm thinking, Derek, that if we do something the 1st of January, they'll have information back to you about what may, if anything, may happen in this next season. And what I would like to suggest is for Sylvia on our staff, she's been taking notes to actually develop some policy questions that we have an opportunity to consider and then straw poll. And I don't think a 3-week return is going to delay the process, is it?
I think because we continue to say that we're not going to do Twilight for next year, I don't think delaying hurts. Because again, we're looking to really tee this up for the next budget.
But I want to be clear that you may have opportunities that could come forward concerning next season.
We didn't want to rule out any opportunity.
That work okay? Yeah. I just think it's important that we take some time to think about these policy options, and we've been throwing a lot of things right now, and I think if Sylvia, you could work to identify some of those with the staff of helping provide some direction for them as they come back for an actual recommendation. Does that work? Council members, you okay with that? I'm sorry to punt, but today feels a little bit like a punting day.
Mr. Chair.
For me anyway.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, James.
This is, since we have Laura and economic development here, I just have one question, and it's in regards to arts as well, but it's more in regards to the Eccles Theater. We set aside, and help me get this right, the wording right. We set aside some tickets for those kids, some money that was set aside for ticket sales for low-income individuals, kids specifically. And can we get an idea of how that money was used, how many tickets that bought for the kids, and where we're at with that?
I'm happy to report that program has just been developed, and I believe it will be transmitted imminently.
We have meetings
Hasn't
set
already,
up, actually.
So, yeah,
Have
it'll be
meetings set up
transmitted
with
to you
Laura or with Leah.
if it hasn't already been.
Well, that's
So.
great. I didn't know that, so
Yeah.
awesome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You understand what I'm asking for? Okay, great, thank you. We have our last agenda item, other than some announcements, is a resolution concerning a public benefits analysis of a city fee waiver for a new public health center. Sylvia, you're up. At least you're on the agenda. Is it not you, or is it you? And then I think Cindy's got some additional information to participate too. Council members, you may recall that we've had a public hearing on this month and a half ago, and it's scheduled for tentative action this evening, and we just wanted to provide you an opportunity to review before we vote. So, Sylvia?
There's no new information.
Cindy, any additional information?
No, just council members had a few questions. So what we have done is we have two motions that you can use to create other motions or whatever. One is in support and one is in opposition. So those are at your places across the way.
Any questions? Elisa?
So in the same motion, we would move to close the public hearing and consider.
Actually, your
The public hearing is
Closed.
closed.
Okay, I
We
just was in
closed
the
it
notes.
the night of, and we just referred action to a future meeting.
But we apparently wrote the wrong title on motion number
Yeah.
one, close and
So
consider.
That's why I was just confused. I
That
thought we
was-
closed it.
So could we make sure that that's updated at our seats, that it doesn't say close the public hearing since we're already closed? It's just an action item. Great.
And
Any additional questions? All right, thank you very much, Sylvia. We do not have a homeless issue check-in, and we do not have a Northwest Quadrant item check-in. We do have announcements.
okay, may I?
Before we go into announcements, I would just like to mention it's just past sunset. So I just want to take a moment to recognize that tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, and we all wish everyone a very happy Hanukkah celebration. Yes, Cindy.
Okay. The National League of Cities Congressional City Conference is one of the key conferences for elected officials from around the country. It is in March in Washington, D.C. If there is anyone who is planning to go who has not yet registered, would you please check in with Becky? It's important that we get this taken care of right away before the holidays so that you are sure to get a space at the conference.
Can you remind us of the dates?
Yes, Sunday, March 11th through Wednesday, March 14th. There are seminars on the Saturday. Also, it's done by a separate organization, but they're pretty meaty seminars that are held on Saturday. So in some cases in the past, council members have left on Friday and have returned on Wednesday. Is it Wednesday night? Yeah. So. Oh, yeah. The council members going out of office have a question. Okay. The next item is.
Want to go, Lisa?
Me
I
either.
don't think we can. I'm pretty sure we can't. Yeah.
Okay. The availability for the new council group photo. When we have a new council convened, we need to get a group photo. And it is always nice to be able to do a daytime shot outside. So Tuesday, January 16th at 1:15, but I think I read that somebody has a conflict at that time. Andrew does, okay. All right, so we need to circle back and make a new plan. One of the suggestions, I think, was between the committee of the whole meeting and the formal meeting. That wouldn't allow for an outside shot, but at least we could get the inside one taken care of. I think there is a meeting on the 16th.
Not popping up on my calendar yet, so.
There's a tentative meeting on this. It's part of the schedule for review.
Okay, that means we haven't sent them out yet, so we need to do that. Thank you. See how much I learned from you guys all over.
There's and I don't know where it is, but there's been a circulation of some tentative dates for next year.
It's on
So
the
it might
back
be
of
in your
this
e-
packet.
Yeah, so it's on the tentative dates, but those appointments have not been sent out. So you will be adopting those in probably your first meeting. So, but this is an opportunity for feedback to staff. So if you have anything you want conflicts or any recommendations, you might give those to staff, but that won't get adopted until the new council members are on board.
Sorry. This at 1:15. Yeah. Okay. Molly is educating me that the 16th at 1:15 is a new date based on Andrew's availability. So what we need to know is if everybody else in the group of remaining council members is available. So if you could check your calendars. Thank you. Okay. All right. So Aaron is available. January 16th at 1:15. Okay. Okay. And then we'll just wait to hear from others. Then the next item is the administration has given you a heads up on, you heard this a little bit when we were talking about fund balance, but they've given us more information on the ballpark lighting replacement funding. The lights were browning out or going out at the end of the season. There is some funding in the account, the sponsorship account there, but they will need $300,000 from the general fund balance. This is not before you in a budget opening yet, but because of the need to get it taken care of by the time the spring ball games begin, we wanted to run it by you, be sure you had the information, and see whether you are okay with the administration beginning the planning. For that, they'll have to invest some funds in getting the plans drawn and things ordered. So you would be asked later to approve the funding for this in the next budget opening.
Questions? Yeah, Aaron.
One thing, the ballpark, I know that this is a contractual obligation. I don't think we can actually oppose anything about having to make this repair, but I just wanted to say on the record for their dialogues that we have examined with the community on Richard Street in Merrimack. Jennifer Seelig from the mayor's office, Patrick, or actually Tina was there, and Patrick, I think you stopped by, or David, I think you may have stopped by. Anyway, we did a walkthrough on the alleyway of that neighborhood that intersects the back of the ballpark, which is the southeast corner, and saw where the ballpark fencing is being broken open for people to go into that recessed area at the southeast corner of the ballpark field to use drugs. And I know that there's been some dialogue since this meeting with the community about improving the fencing to discourage access to that area, about using our environmental design assessment to look at all the trees and bushes that are in that ballpark area, moving storage of park or picnic benches, which the ballpark was storing all their benches down there, which made it extra attractive. And also the potential for including some kind of lighting down there to discourage this. So I would like to request an update on the city's work with the ballpark entity to make those changes. And I just wanted to use this opportunity to shove that in there. Thanks.
Okay, and that would be a city, there would be some
Right.
that relates to maintenance, and the other would be a
Yes.
city expense.
Yes.
Okay, so we want them to come back and tell you what they've looked at, what the cost is looking at, and what they can do without funding
Yes.
as well. Okay,
Thank you.
got it.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, and then the final item is the review of the 2018 annual calendar. And we are required by state law to publish this annually. It does not preclude the sitting council from changing dates as needed throughout the year, but it is a guide that is published on the state website as well as the city website. So if you have looked at that and have any suggestions for changes, please let us know. We should get it published before January 2nd, but we will need to circle back once the new council is
It
convened.
doesn't require a vote, though, at this.
No,
And
just-
council members, it can be modified at any time.
Right.
Yeah, so I would suggest you pay particular attention to the July and August meetings. When we were looking at the calendar, we were trying to carve out some possible blocks for vacation time. So just look at that and make sure it works for what you need, and make any suggested changes to the staff around that.
Make one before I forget, whether or not we could consider July 17th meeting as a tentative.
Yes, I just saw that same thing, that there are only 2 meetings required in July. I don't know why I can look at this 10 times and not see it until I'm sitting here, but, so you would just need to choose 2.
Or the 31st, which would give us a 3-week break.
I think we were looking at
That might be
eliminating the
better.
31st, I think is what we were initially looking at. Okay, so, and the other thing to keep in mind, sitting as the RDA board, is the last couple of years we've taken a break in either July or August and not had an RDA meeting, so that's something for future consideration. Okay, anything else, Cindy?
Let me just ask, is it okay with the group if we put the word tentative next to both the 17th and the 31st, and then later the council can decide which one works? Thank you all.
Okay, that concludes our briefing business for this evening. There is a reception on the 4th floor, and they're ready for us. So that officially begins at 5:30, and then we will be moving downstairs to convene our formal meeting at 7 o'clock across the hall.
Mr. Chair, let's be specifically clear. They're waiting for you and Lisa. That's it.
They're waiting. Everyone always asks about you.
No, they're always asking
James.
about you.
Always
Where's
asks
that
about
Stan
you.
guy at? Come on now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
SLC TV, Salt Lake City's Government Access Channel. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, and today I'm down at the Gallivan Center, which is a host of many activities during the holiday season. If you get a chance, come and check it out. There are things happening from ice skating, food trucks, hot chocolate, live DJs and parties, all here in downtown Salt Lake City. For this week's episode of Capital City News, we hear from Candace Stedman with the Salt Lake City Arts Council about the holiday craft market.